All right. Operation Redwood, Chapter 25, The Confrontation. The next morning, the forest looked scrubbed and fresh. The rain had washed away a summer's worth of dust. The girls went off to work duty, promising to check the papers and to see if Bruce's story had run. Just before noon, Julian heard a triumphant shout. Robin was running up the path, waving a newspaper in her hand, with Ariel and Molly close behind. Quick, Danny yelled down. Send up the paper in the pulley seat. We want to read it. We haven't even read it, Robin called back indignantly. We saved it so we could all read the story together. Oops. When all the girls were up, Robin spread the paper on the floor of the deck, turned a few pages, and there they all were, leaning over the treehouse railing and smiling. Page A6, not the best, Julian thought, because page A6 means that you had to turn 3 pages to get to the story in the newspaper. So A6 isn't the best because it's not the front page. That's where he wanted the story. But the headline was good. Ancient redwood stands vanish as demand for old growth continues. Underneath their picture, it said Julian Carter Lee, Danny Lopez, Ariel Glazer, and Robin Elder stage a treehouse protest of IPX's plan to clear cut Big Tree Grove in Mendocino County. Julian's eyes went up to the top of the story. While most kids are still in camp, four children in the heart of Mendocino County have found a different summertime activity, protesting the logging of ancient redwoods. Big Tree Grove is part of a 120-acre parcel recently acquired by San Francisco investment firm IPX Investment Corp. In April, the state approved a timber harvest plan that would permit logging of the parcel's rare old-growth redwoods, as well as a number of younger stands. Big Tree Grove has been here so long. It would be a terrible thing to see it destroyed, said Julian Carter Lee. Julian, a student at Filbert Middle School in San Francisco, also happens to be the nephew of Sibley Carter, who stepped up as the new CEO of IPX last September. Coincidentally, he says he met Robin Elder, 12, who lives next door to Big Tree Grove, through a pen pal program. No more logging of old growth, Robin declared, looking like a future forest activist. Much of the original redwood forest in this area was logged by the 1920s, and timber harvesting continued to dominate the economy through most of the 20th century. Today, while logging still brings in tens of millions of dollars, the volume of logs from Mendocino County is a fraction of historic levels. Local mill closures, increasing government regulation, and competition from overseas logging are leading to a change in the timber culture of the region. Less than 5% of the original redwood forest remains today, most protected in state and federal parks. And the most recent major governmental acquisition was the joint state and federal purchase of 7,500 acres of the Headwaters Forest in Humboldt County in 1999, which preserved the largest tracts of old growth then in private hands. The few pockets of unprotected old growth remaining today are subject to harvesting under the state's forestry laws. The article continued with interviews with state employees, wildlife biologists, and an IPX spokeswoman. Julian skimmed the last paragraph, which read, Ariel Glazer, 11, who grew up not so far from Big Tree Grove, says she plans to stay in the treehouse as long as she can. My mother used to play in Big Tree Grove when she was a little girl, she said. Look at all this beauty. If they keep cutting down the trees, nobody will ever remember what a forest is supposed to look like. Julian watched Ariel smile as she came to the end of the article. So what do you guys think? He said. Here I thought I was being so articulate and witty, Danny said in an injured tone, and I didn't even get a quote. Julian frowned and looked at the page more closely. Well, you got the photo op. You're the only one who looks halfway decent. It was true. Robin was squinting. Ariel's crooked smile was crookeder than usual, and Julian was staring slightly off to the side. Danny grinned at the camera like a movie star. Do you think people are reading it? Ariel said. Sure, they're reading it. Robin looked up from the paper. Thousands and thousands of people. It's exactly what we need. This article is going to put Big Tree Grove on the map. But the forest was so quiet for the next 2 days that it was hard to believe their story was being broadcast to the world. The children continued to work on the trail in the morning and prepare their meals in the evening. They read and reread the article until they practically had it memorized. And all the time they kept waiting for something to happen. But Big Tree Grove remained as still as ever. Friday afternoon, Molly, Ariel, and the boys were playing poker on the deck while Robin sat brooding on the corner. You know, she said, even after you leave on Sunday, I can still do Operation Redwood. I mean, Julia Butterfly Hill lived by herself for 2 whole years. I could stay too, Molly put down 2 pears. After all, we can't just abandon Operation Redwood. We've only been here 6 nights. That's nothing. We can't expect overnight success. What do you want? A big battle with IPX with armed guards and everything? Danny said. Julian was in the middle of dealing the next hand when something in Danny's tone made him look up. I don't know, Robin said. Anything's better than this. Well, Danny said, shifting his gaze, be careful what you wish for, because there's something big and ugly coming toward us, and it's not in a good mood. Julian whipped around to see 2 men who looked like security guards clomping down the forest. Pete, the man with a clipboard, was close behind. And following purposefully after them, his face set in stone, was Sibley. Robin bolted up, leaped over the pulley seat, and tied the rope to the cleat. Remember, there's nothing they can do to us. We're safe up here. The 4 men stopped, and Pete pointed up at the treehouse. Sibley gave a sharp nod, then strode forward alone. He was dressed in a dark blue suit, a gold tie, and shiny black shoes. He looked, Julian thought, like an executive who'd been kidnapped and released in the middle of the wilderness to find his way home. Where are these guys coming from? Julian asked in a low tone. Greeley Road isn't far, Robin whispered. It's an easy walk from the road up to here. They watched in silence as Sibley crunched towards them. When he was directly below the treehouse, he stopped and stood, looking at them with a grim expression. Julian, Danny, girls, he finally said. Hi, Uncle Sibley, Julian said. Hey, Mr. Carter. Danny was looking forward to this, Julian could tell. Sibley's expression didn't change. I knew you were hiding something, Julian, he said at last. I knew you came up here for some reason. No wonder you wouldn't talk. He stared at Julian as if he were trying to calculate what other schemes he might have cooked up. Look, you've had your fun. It's time to come down now. The children were silent. We can't come down, Julian finally said. We can't come down until you promise to save Big Tree Grove. Julian, this isn't a game. You need to come down immediately. Nobody spoke. A cloud suddenly shifted so that the sun was shining directly into Sibley's face. He squinted and loosened his necktie. This land doesn't belong to me, Julian, Sibley began in a more conciliatory tone. It's IPX property. That treehouse is IPX property. It's not safe. You could break your necks. Kids have been playing up here for years and years, Robin said. Nobody's ever gotten hurt. But you have to admit it could happen. We're not admitting it, Danny yelled down. Listen, you kids are trespassing on private property. That's against the law. If you come down now, we won't have to press charges. We're not coming down, Robin said. Sibley didn't even look at Robin. His eyes were focused on Julian. I know you probably thought we were too tough on you after you ran away. I was your age once. We were doing what we thought was best. Julian considered. Uncle Sibley, I didn't come up here because of that, or because of you. We're doing this for Big Tree Grove. We just want people to know what's happening so you won't cut it down. We want you to change your mind. Julian, I am not the bad guy here. Sibley took out a handkerchief and wiped his gleaming brow. This was a done deal before I ever came on board. I tried to explain that to Preston this morning. It's bad enough you're giving IPX all this negative publicity. Now my own son thinks I'm the bad guy. That reminds me of the logging perspective podcast we listened to. Preston read the article. Julian couldn't help smiling. Sibley glared at him. And of course, somebody gave him the idea to do a report on redwoods. You must think you're pretty clever. Preston did that whole report on himself. I didn't help him at all, Julian said. You shouldn't cut down Big Tree. Even Preston knows that. Everything isn't about making money. IPX is about making money, Sibley said in a low voice. That's what we do. But there must be another way, Julian protested. There's always costs. There's always risk. That's the way the world works. Money doesn't just grow on trees. Sibley attempted a strained smile. There's only 4% left, Julian said. We'll plant new trees. It's not enough. We can't come down. Please don't cut down Big Tree Grove, please. There are ways to make you come down, Sibley said, though we'd rather not. I've got a pine cone in my pocket and I'm not afraid to use it, Danny shouted. Sibley ignored Danny. He made a motion as if turning to go, then stopped and pulled something from his jacket. He weighed it in his hand a moment, then held it up. Julian, I believe you left this at my house. The smile faded from Julian's face. There, in Sibley's hand, was the ivory pocket knife. Oh no. Sibley turned it over in his hand. It's a nice little knife. 2 blades, Dad's initials, JSC, John Sibley Carter. I remember that the day Billy got it. There was a race on Buzzards Bay. We sailed all day and your father came in first by a boat length. He won the cup, youngest winner ever. Sibley opened one blade and closed it with a click. Dad was so proud. He gave him this too. Robin glanced worriedly at Julian. Hey, that's not fair. He got that from his father and you won't give it back? All I'm asking him to do is respect the law and come down from the treehouse. Sibley's voice was calm now, in charge. Let's go, Julian. The show's over. That's from his father and you're holding it hostage? Danny said. That's pretty mean, you big Grinch. You're holding our property hostage, Sibley said. That's not so nice either. One is significantly less nice than the other. Julian's dad passed away. That's messed up. Uncle Sibley. Julian stood almost hypnotized by the glare of the sun on the ivory handle. It was just a thing, he reminded himself. It had just belonged to his father. It wasn't part of him. You can't stay up there forever. Sibley checked his watch impatiently. My father gave me that knife, Julian finally said. That's why I brought it. I respect your rights, and I'm asking you to respect mine and IPX's. A breeze stirred and the branches high above the tree house began to whisper. Julian took a deep breath. I'm not coming down, not even for the knife. He could feel Robin's eyes on him. I never thought you'd come here, but now that you have, you see what it's like. You could tell IPX not to cut down these trees. You could save Big Tree Grove. His uncle's expression didn't change. What exactly do you kids want? We want Big Tree Grove to be protected, Julian said. Forever. And outside Big Tree, Robin added, we want sustainable timber harvesting, like Ed Greeley did before. Give Julian his pocket knife, Danny shouted. And for the rest of us, $1 million in unmarked bills. Robin glared and Danny held up his hands. Just kidding. Sibley wiped his brow again. He put the knife back in his jacket and walked toward the 3 men. Molly tugged at her sister's shirt and started whispering in her ear. Robin nodded, then bent down and murmured a few low words. After a few minutes in somber conversation, Sibley returned. We're willing to compromise, he said loudly up to them. I think you're going to be pleased. It's a little late to make changes with a THP approved already, but Pete said we can spare the treehouse and still break even. If you all come down right now. The treehouse? Ariel said. What's the point of having a treehouse in the middle of a clear cut? We didn't come up in the trees to save the treehouse. We went in the treehouse to save the trees, Danny said. Capiche? That's my final offer, Sibley said. If you don't come down now, saving the treehouse is off the table. You know, Robin said, I think Julian deserves his dad's pocket knife. What if only he came down? What? Julian spun around and stared at Robin. He couldn't believe she was offering him up on the negotiating table. If he came down, you give him the knife, right? She grabbed an apple from the basket and started polishing it on her shirt. That's right, Sibley said. He comes down, he gets the knife. Here, are you hungry? She said, throwing an apple down to him. It slipped through his fingers and rolled a few feet along the forest floor. Sibley bent down awkwardly to pick it up. Thanks. He dusted off the apple and looked as if he might take a bite, but didn't. What are you doing? Julian said to Robin in a low voice. I don't need the knife. It's not that important. I'm staying with you guys. Julian's with us. Forget the knife, Danny whispered loudly. And why are you feeding him? Julian ignored them. How do we know it's really Julian's knife? She shouted down. Julian knows. It was true. Julian had recognized the knife immediately. He'd never seen another one like it. Robin paced along the deck with her hands in her pockets, then turned quickly to Sibley. Show me again. Sibley took the knife out of his jacket and held it up. Robin lay down on the floor of the treehouse and stuck her head between the railings. I don't see the initials, she said. Hold it up higher. Sibley glanced back at the men and held the knife high into the air, nearly as high as the pulley seat. That was funny, Julian thought. He knew he'd seen Robin cleat the chair at the top, and now it was halfway to the ground. Suddenly, a pale hand reached over the top of the chair and snatched the pocket knife from Sibley's grasp. Robin leaped to her feet and started pulling furiously on the rope. As the seat lurched into the air, Molly sat upright, her thin cheeks flushed and her eyes shining brightly. Special delivery, she cried in a trembling voice, unable to stop grinning. She handed the knife off to Danny, who presented it with a flourish to Julian. With a flourish means with like pageantry, like being extra. Thanks, Molly, Julian stammered, too stunned to say more. He ran his thumb along the smooth ivory handle and the silver initials, his grandfather's initials, then put the knife in his pocket. When he turned back to Sibley, he thought he saw a flash of desperation in his uncle's face. Is this just a game to you all? Sibley said. Because let me tell you, IPX doesn't think it's funny. I don't think it's funny. I personally thought that was pretty funny, Danny said. Come on, weren't you surprised? I know I was. For the last time, I'm asking you to come down, please, as the head of IPX and as your uncle. Julian could sense the others holding back, watching him. His uncle stood below, sweating and squinting, but Julian was beyond his reach. The ivory knife was in his pocket. He was surrounded by his best friend, two fast-running local girls, and an intrepid 8-year-old. He was 30 feet in the air. We're not coming down. Please, don't cut down Big Tree Grove, please. You could save it. You could bring Preston here. Sibley's face hardened. This conversation is going nowhere. I have to tell you, you're making the wrong decision. You're going to regret this. And, giving Julian a spiteful look, he turned and stumbled on a tree root, barely catching himself. Have a nice trip, Danny called out. See you next fall. Sibley approached the three men and motioned to the treehouse. After a minute, Sibley and Pete turned and walked off in the direction they'd come. The two security officers hitched up their belts, crossed their arms, and settled into position. Whew.